At the Global Liver Institute, we believe it all starts with a patient. So what happens when a patient, a liver patient no less, one of the 500 million people living with conditions that often go undiagnosed, untreated, or misdiagnosed, mistreated, and stigmatized, brings the challenges of liver patients front and center? And what happens when a patient then leads a discussion with world experts in policy, research, clinical care, and wellness on ways to overcome these challenges? Let's find out today on GLI Live.
Hello and welcome to this episode of GLI Live. I am your host, Donna Cryer, the CEO of the Global Liver Institute. We are continuing our celebration of Donate Life Month, and I can think of no better guests to help me in that celebration and exploration of the issues involved with this month than our guests today, who are both board members of one of our Liver Action Network community organization members who make us so strong and who allow us to share our work with people where they live and breathe and get their care and just make us so much more effective. And so I'm here to welcome Dr. Mousab Tabbaa, who is not only a board member with the Northeast Ohio Liver Alliance, but is the president and CEO of NorthShore Gastroenterology and Endoscopy Centers. One would think that as many endoscopes as I've had, I would be able to pronounce that easily, but maybe usually I'm asleep, so I don't have to pronounce the word. Just say thank you for your great care. And we also have with us Elaine Turley, who is a co-founder and executive director of Transplant House of Cleveland, which is such a special place and instrumental in the efforts around organ donation and transplantation. So welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Great.
Thank you very, very much, Donna.
Thank you. So Elaine, maybe we'll start with you. How did you become involved in this issue?
Yes, well, thank you for asking. I became involved in Northeast Ohio Liver Alliance simply because I was asked. Note to everyone listening, it helps to ask. So I was honored to be asked because Dr. Tabbaa and the other 3 doctors that founded the Alliance are well known in the Cleveland area for their work in liver disease. And in fact, Dr. Carey was one of my father's doctors very long ago. So the way that I got interested in liver health is that my father was diagnosed with primary sclerosing cholangitis. And that's after living for several decades with Crohn's disease. And fortunately, his doctors at Cleveland Clinic knew to watch his liver health. So shortly after that diagnosis, he was informed that he would need to go on the waiting list for a transplant, which was a very big shock to all of us because in 1991, when we got that news, we didn't know anyone that had received a liver transplant. And yet we learned very quickly, as you know, Donna.
Yes, I'm from that same era and,
right.
same path, actually, to needing a transplant, from inflammatory bowel disease to PSC to transplant in the early 90s at the dawn of the era.
Right. It makes me wonder if you and my dad ever crossed paths, but the transplant community is small, I know. But he received that gift of life in 1992 at the Cleveland Clinic, and he lived for 10 years. He later had cancer. And we lost him, but boy, were those powerful 10 years and barely a blip in his health. But this is a very full circle sort of legacy story for me about Transplant House, because at some point, months after my dad's transplant, he was experiencing rejection and the clinic wasn't able to control it to the extent they wanted to. He felt fine. Was still working, et cetera. But they sent him to Omaha, Nebraska Medical Center because that's where what they called at that time FK506 was in development. And what is it called now?
Prograf or tacrolimus. Yes.
Yeah. So that was the only place you could get it because it was still in this final stages of approval. So my parents went out there. They thought, grab the pills and come home. Wow. But in fact, they were there 6 weeks. and they got to stay in specialized housing for transplant patients. And the light bulb went on for them. When you have to travel away from home for expert care, especially something as complex as transplant and the emotional roller coaster that goes with it, nothing better than to have a community around you of people that understand that, and to have low-cost housing. I mean, to be away from home for 6 weeks, pay hotel fees. So they actually came back to the Cleveland Clinic and their social worker and said, world-class care involves housing for these patients. So my parents were actually the impetus for the founding of Transplant House. It took us a while to get here, but yeah, that's the really beautiful story of my involvement here.
That's a wonderful family legacy. Dr. Tabbaa, weren't you doing enough just saving lives and doing transplants and patient care? You wanted to do more. Why did you want to do more and help set up the alliance?
Well, first of all, I'm really honored to be in the presence of two wonderful ladies who have experiences that so personal and so touching that makes the whole meaning of our organization in Northeast Ohio and our global organization really very touching, and it makes sense why we're doing this. So I appreciate your presence. I appreciate both of your efforts and what you've done, particularly, I mean, both of you, it's amazing. In my personal journey, I didn't have a personal involvement in family-wise in liver disease, but I had more than personal involvement. I had 3 years of fellowship in one of the, at the time was Cleveland Metropolitan General Hospital, and the chief of GI at the time was a gentleman with the name Tony Tabbaa. Tony Tabbaa was world-renowned hepatologist who passed away a few years ago. He became not only a mentor to me, but a father figure. We maintained a friendship for years and years after that, till his death, actually. I visited him shortly before that. And he mentored so many hepatologists. One of them you might be familiar with, for example, Dr. Bruce Bacon, who did the Chronic Liver Disease Foundation, and he is also one of the giants in hepatology. And over the years, when I did my GI fellowship, I finished in Tony approached me. He said, "Oh, you want to do something, NIH research or something?" And I really wanted to go into clinical practice, but he convinced me to do on some research. And as I was thinking about that, I was in the elevator. I was used to take care of this gentleman who had biliary atresia. And this is 1988. And 1986. And so the gentleman basically was initiated, had it for all his life. We used to have recurrent bleeding and all issues. And I go in the elevator one day and I see this wonderfully muscular, healthy young man and tanned. And he looks at me and he says, "Hi, Dr. Tabbaa." And I said, "Hi." And I didn't know who he is. And then a few minutes, he said, "You didn't recognize me, did you?" And then he mentioned his name, and I was in awe. He just had his transplant in Pittsburgh, actually, at the time. And it really dawned on me what this whole liver disease is all about, is transforming lives. And so I applied for a grant that I got from the American Liver Foundation at the time, and then stayed as a fellow in research for a year. And then I felt I should pay my debt back to my education. So I got involved in the American Liver Foundation, became the MAC chair for it. And then as the pandemic hit, we'll talk about maybe later, we felt that we need to basically do our own local organization. So myself, Dr. Pierre Golem, Dr. Mari Cohen, and Dr. Bill Carey, and along we invited Elaine and other board members to join us, and we started Northeast Ohio Liver Alliance. So I feel it's basically involvement because of how wonderful the research community I worked with during my training and the impact that I saw firsthand on liver patients. So it has been a wonderful journey.
It is, a great privilege to be able to support your efforts in wanting to make sure that you had community-led initiatives that really understood the needs and could really focus on direct service and impact. And we're so excited to support you. I also wanted to take a moment for our audience to point out, biliary atresia is a liver disease that affects infants and small children. Most people don't realize that children can have this devastating liver disease.
Exactly.
So to see someone who benefited from your care and was, allowed to grow up into that, muscular young man in the elevator is really just a testament to all of the basic science research that happens at AASLD, and which is how I have an opportunity to work with Dr. Bacon these days in their foundation, and the work that you do. So tell us about what care in Cleveland what looks like, and what the patient needs in Cleveland. Maybe Elaine, maybe starting with you. When patients' families arrive at your transplant house, what does their journey look like? What are the conditions that they have?
Right. Yeah. Thank you for asking. And we use that word journey very frequently,
Mm-hmm.
Particularly with people that are coming to us at the very beginning.
Right.
So they have an end stage organ disease, or
Mm-hmm.
had a sudden virus or an accident of some kind. COVID. We've had some patients who
Mm-hmm.
COVID. And we say to them, you're at the beginning of a journey. There's the evaluation and hopefully the listing and the
Mm-hmm.
waiting, which can just be endless, and transplant and recovery. So we see a variety of things. First of all, they're disoriented and they're
Mm-hmm.
frightened. And many of our guests that stay here come from small towns
Mm-hmm.
all around Ohio, and many from adjoining states around
Mm-hmm.
Ohio. So there's a sense of overwhelm just, arriving in a new city. And then you set foot on either campus, Cleveland Clinic or university hospitals, and that's very overwhelming too.
Yeah.
So, there's immediate need for help with navigation of things, including
Right.
things.
Very literally, sometimes we use that term sort of conceptually, navigating through the healthcare process and, benefits or treatments or whatever. But with large centers like that, you literally need help navigating where to find your next appointment, how to get
Absolutely.
from, imaging to lab work to, so literal navigation sometimes.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, there are those foundational things.
Mm-hmm.
And people, after they see their apartments here, which are just like home, intentionally, very casually decorated, you can see them begin to relax. By the next morning, they're saying, I feel safe. And we understand safe to be partly the neighborhood, but partly access to that medical center, especially if their loved one is inpatient or even here post-transplant, and with all the things they're nervous about, that ability to get to that hospital quickly is very comforting to them. But, in those layers of navigation, there's also education that needs to happen. And we didn't start this organization thinking first about education, but it's one of those things that has come up. And it's one of the reasons we now have a clinical transplant social worker on our staff, is because sometimes patients go through all those evaluation appointments and they think they're on the list. I mean, they just, even though the hospital explains it all, as you know, it's just too much brand new information at once.
Right.
So our social worker does spend some time with families, just explaining that process. You're not listed yet, and here are some things that you're going to have to wait on. So she also does a great deal of one-on-one support. She's a licensed social worker and does counseling outside of here. So we do a lot of that with the caregiver. So I always tell people that the unique thing about transplant is you can't just get your neighbor to give you a ride to the hospital when it's time for surgery. You have to show that you have one or maybe several strong caregivers who are going to help you along the whole path. And an interest of mine is the equity in that system, and for people that don't have as much support and even have their own transportation. But therefore, because the caregiver is essential and yet not fully supported by the hospital because they aren't the patient, right? We end up doing a lot of support of the caregiver. So that has really become a focus area for us, just keeping them strong so they can keep the patient strong. And I can, throughout this conversation, I can share more, but back to your original question, sort of the buckets that we see are navigation, education, and emotional support. And we also work with some of our guests on further financial support. I mean, they're getting affordable housing here, but it's not enough for a lot of us if we are here for weeks or months. So our social worker helps to find other financial resources too.
I think that's fantastic. We have as you know, because you'll be participating in our Caregiver Summit that we'll be doing in May to get to some of those issues. And I'm so pleased that you focused on it as an equity issue, because it is. If you don't have someone who could take time off from their job to travel with you, to care for you, you may be as a disadvantage in accessing transplantation. And so to be more creative and supportive and recognizing and helping people put together networks of friends or other types of supports to be able to qualify and to successfully go through transplantation is really wonderful in making it more accessible. Dr. Tabbaa, so how has the transplant or the liver population that you see, changed over time? Elaine and I talked about our family's, autoimmune or rare disease transplant stories, and that used to be sort of the main part of the list, but now it's more fatty liver disease, other types of liver disease. What are you seeing? What are patients facing when they come to see you?
It's kind of interesting, actually. It's if you look back, even if you look at our website and how the whole liver care in Cleveland started, I used to be told by Dr. Tabbaa that he was preceded by a gentleman named George Gabusta, who became the president of the American Association of Study of Liver Disease. We're talking about 1954 now. So this is, and during that time, he showed me these ancient slides about how to put people in big tanks to make diuresis if they have ascites. So we were focused in the 60s and 70s on complication of advanced liver disease, and we really basically liver disease did not take off as aggressively because the complication of liver disease was only the tip of the iceberg. As time went by, and in the early 80s, you had Dr. Houghton and others who basically Nobel Prize winners, and Dr. Harvey Alter, who discovered the hepatitis C story, and then later on became able to advance its therapy to the level that now we treat with success of 98 to 100% all type of hepatitis C. We saw a lot of hepatitis C patients. We treated them. Although the numbers of complication from them continue to rise because they have all liver disease, a new epidemic of fatty liver disease happened. And as unfortunately the population gained weight and BMIs went up in the country, and maybe the pandemic didn't help with that, the prevalence of liver disease is significantly increased among patients who have diabetes and high BMIs, particularly fatty liver disease. And that's now the change in the dynamic. So there's a lot of ongoing trials and understanding and effort to really combat the pandemic of fatty liver currently as it compares, while the hepatitis C is still there. Of course, with all of that, alcohol remain a significant player in causing liver injury. And then you have the plethora of the less common congenital acquired autoimmune diseases that can also advance liver disease. But I would say the three most common causes of advanced liver disease in the country remain Hep C and the fatty liver and alcohol. And we see that. But the spectrum is, I mean, we talked about transplant, and I think it's amazing what we do with transplant, but the spectrum of liver disease and the care of liver disease extends from a good community to outstanding liver centers that we have in the Cleveland area. And I can tell you, we are very blessed to have a wonderful hepatology community, both at university hospitals and the Cleveland Clinic and Metro, and extends to the community. Majority of really specialized care happens in the academic centers, although many of the gastroenterologists in the community, because of that communication, are capable of handling the basic stuff before referring to the center. So the community of medical educators in Cleveland, medical providers, has really done, I think, outstanding job in identifying and properly treating various degrees of liver disease. We're very blessed.
Um, I think that having been to the Cleveland, area and seeing the wonderful medical resources that you have, and also I've been to churches in Cleveland, and so I know some of the community resources that you have as well. How is there increased interest, since you talked about fatty liver disease and its connections with diabetes? Are there is there increased interest from endocrinologists and primary care doctors and other types of medical specialists in understanding how to care for liver patients or how to prevent liver disease from getting to the advanced stages that we've been discussing?
I think there's a lot of room to improve education in that regard among primary care physician,
Mm-hmm.
endocrinologists, and others, especially in the area of fatty liver disease. I mean, we still see patients who now come with either cirrhosis or, for that matter, liver cancer, who were told 10 years ago, oh, you have fatty liver, don't worry about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the time has come for the population to understand, and more importantly, for the care providers. And I think there's a lot of effort in that regard. I recently came back from a meeting in Arizona with the Chronic Liver Disease Foundation, and many of the speakers, Dr. Zubair Yanusi and
Mm-hmm.
others, who basically addressed the issue of fatty liver and the need to educate endocrinologists, primary care,
Mm-hmm.
about the progressive nature of it and identifying it. It's both. We are learning of it.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, the standard of care is still the diet and exercise, what have you. But we are learning a lot about it, and we need as hepatologists and gastroenterologists to educate the primary care physician, endocrinologists, and other to basically really recognize the importance of liver disease in these settings and how it progresses.
Yeah. It's been a pleasure and a privilege to work with Dr. Younasi from the various, the very earliest days of our GLI NASH Council. And I think is really a milestone moment when Zubair went to speak at a meeting for the American College of Physicians, who's a NASH Council member, to create that bridge between hepatology and primary care on this issue. I think that's how we can be successful. And our hope is that we can do a better job of matching the state and local chapters of the different endocrine and primary care organizations that we work with on a national level at GLI with our LAN members like you, and make it easier for you to develop those relationships and have joint meetings and really accelerate the bridge building, so that no patient walks into an office and is told, what you said, that, oh, don't worry about it. It's not serious. But that whatever doctor's office they enter, whether it's a primary care or endocrinology or cardiology, that they get the right diagnosis and tests and referral to gastroenterology and hepatology, and that there's more of a sort of a collective sort of ownership of
100%.
liver health for all of their patients.
I think any major challenge needs collaborative work by not organization, physician, what have you. And I think without having all the stakeholders being involved, aware,
Right.
we will not really achieve the lofty goal of a community without liver disease. So I think sometimes the goal is too high and sounds too shiny, like peace on earth. But it is reality that it is achievable if every stakeholder can really be aware of what happened. And I think the ongoing effort toward that will keep eradicating and decreasing the prevalence of liver disease, hopefully.
Absolutely. As we've launched our Liver Health as Public Health campaign, one of the things that I've tried to emphasize is that many of the things that promote liver health are the same things that promote your heart health and brain health. So it's not like a lot of extra different work. It's often the sort of the same things, but maybe with a greater urgency if people appreciate the impact that it's having on your liver in addition to those other organs. So Elaine, if you had a magic wand and could create anything that you needed or wanted, or solve the biggest problem for the patients that come to you, what would you do with your magic wand at Transplant House?
Oh gosh, that's a big question, and I probably have many responses to it. You know, I'll start by talking about my affiliation with NEOLA and why one reason I'm excited about it is to be in closer conversation with these doctors and their colleagues, because they can elevate the work that we do. You know, I referenced education.
Right.
And you talk about fatty liver disease, and all of our patients, no matter what organ, are at risk of developing fatty liver disease. We all are in our society right now. So to have easy access to these professionals who can perhaps come on site and help us educate people, and even the caregivers. Many of the caregivers here are not in the best of health either. So it's exciting to think that we could help elevate the population, right? We educate people here when they're sort of confined and scared and will listen. And in fact, in this setting, our social worker who worked at the hospital previously said, wow, I can have much different conversations here in somebody's living room than we ever could have at the hospital, because the hospital is intimidating, right? And the social worker has a white coat on, right? So anyway, I love the collaborative effort locally. We're also a member of the Greater Cleveland Transplant Collaborative, which is a consortium of different organizations, including the hospitals, that all work on the periphery of transplantation. It has, you know, even internally here at Transplant House, when we add new skills, I'm just amazed at how all the rest of us operate at a higher level, right? It's just, we have colleagues, we have knowledge, we have people cheering us on, and we all perform better. So I see that at an organizational level too. The more of that we can do around these common themes, the better. I mean, other magic wand to make our housing free for all these families would be ideal. We have to, as a new organization, ask them to contribute toward the cost of staying with us, because it costs a lot to run physical buildings and have the staff that we do. So that's another thing that comes to mind. And I would say, too, a magic wand for any of our guests who don't already know the power of peer-to-peer support, that they come into the fold. So I would say out of 25 apartments, if we host something, maybe 50% of people come in. And once they've come into a group and they meet someone, you know, they're riding the shuttle together, they're doing this, they're doing that. But, you know, there are always people that just aren't wired that way, sort of, I got to fight this battle on my own. And the peer-to-peer support here is just amazing. You know, we create a safe space for it and we step back and it happens. And I think also, you know, we have an AA group and here that's specifically for transplant candidates or recipients. And so there are liver patients, but there are a lot of heart patients in that group too. And that's a group that largely serves the local community. So people that are patients in these hospitals but live here and don't need to stay at Transplant House because they have their own home and bed, but they really need the support. So it's my hope that that has been a really powerful group. It's unusual. I think it's the only one in Cleveland. And we have had some patients staying here with us who participated while here and now are participating virtually from Florida and from Michigan. So for more people, to have the courage to come together and say, yes, addiction is an issue for me too. And if I hope to receive a transplant, I have to get this under control. And if I hope to live with this transplanted organ, I have to maintain that control. So those are some of the things that come to mind. And I guess I would circle back to that what a challenge this is financially for families to leave home and come. So,
you know, as both my parents were school teachers and my mother stayed in my apartment in DC, well, my father stayed in Connecticut looking after my little brother for the 4 months that I was in the hospital prior to the transplant. And she took the train every day up to Baltimore to be at my bedside. And, you know, so grateful that she could do that, would do that. So I know the value of what you're providing, and we, look forward to working with you to help you scale that and improve that. So Dr. Tabbaa, with this last moments and your magic wand, aside from curing liver disease, what would you most like to do?
I mean, I want to be practical. When I mentioned earlier today that earlier in this webinar that Dr. Tabbaa was my mentor, and literally a few days before he passed away, I sat down and interviewed him about different things, and one of the things, and he wanted that. He called me and asked me to come, and one of his dream is to basically for us to transcend everything else institutionally and any institutional rivalry, and be focused on the patient and be patient centric, and in this case liver centric. So it doesn't matter where we come from, what's our background. If we really focus as a community about our patients, our care, and really give them the best choices they can have and collaborate, I think we can achieve much better success. And I think Northeast Ohio Liver Alliance is exactly meant to do that. That's why we have a representative from all sectors of the community. And the hope is to basically achieve this common goal of really reaching to patients and reaching to families and be able to cure liver disease or at least address liver disease in a manner that we eventually can be proud of and tell the patient that they got the best outcome that's humanly possible. And I think that's achievable. Higher magic wand, yeah, cure all liver diseases. I don't think that's I think it'd be wonderful. But the other realistic thing is funding. I think for people who are listening and want to participate, all the nonprofit organization that we speak on behalf need your participation, because without that participation, educational support, patient support, and community support and research support cannot happen. So we appreciate the involvement of all our community physicians, providers, patients, and every citizen who are listening to basically make these organizations that you are should be, one, to be proud of it, and two, to participate in it and be active in it, and hopefully fund it enough to succeed. So that would be wonderful.
Thank you so much. It is an honor to have the Northeast Ohio Liver Alliance as a Liver Action Network member, and thank you both today.
Please be sure to like this video, subscribe, and share your thoughts and suggestions in the comments below. Join us weekly on Wednesdays at noon Eastern Time for more episodes of GLI Live. Check out our website, globalliver.org, and follow us on social media to learn more about the Global Liver Institute and stay up to date with the latest in liver health. Until next time, stay safe, stay well, and stay connected.